So it's a great privilege and honor for me to extend a hearty welcome to all of you for this afternoon STTP program. Myself, Anju, Assistant Professor from the Department of Information Technology. Today we have a knowledge enabling session on blockchain cryptocurrencies, how they can disturb the world. We have an eminent speaker for this session, Mr. Arjun Vijay, co-founder and chief operating officer of Gitas Cryptocurrency Exchange, Chennai. Gitas Cryptocurrency Exchange is one of the leading digital asset trading platform in India. Arjun Vijay is responsible for spearheading the business by building strong partnership and taking care of daily operations. His passion and interest in cryptocurrency exchange that he created the world-class cryptocurrency trading platform that provides powerful tools and technologies that are easy to use. His experience as a business manager along with education in computer science and engineering help him to understand both technology and business side, gives him an urge over others in the business. Without any further delay, on behalf of management of KCG College of Technology and Department of Information Technology, I welcome our speaker, Mr. Arjun Vijay, for this afternoon session. Welcome you, sir, on the platform. Thank you.
Thanks for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, guys. It's I think this is not this is like third time or fourth time I'm addressing participants from KCG College. So I just want to have like one quick this thing. Like, has anyone attended my session before? Like, out of these 20 people, can someone like type in the chat box or unmute and say this? Okay. Because there are things that I would cover otherwise, or I can skip those portions and directly go to something that's specific for today's session, right? So I don't think anyone has attended a session before, so I'll go with the normal flow, right? The topic I'm going to be delivering here is how blockchain and cryptocurrencies, they are disrupting the world as we know, right? World has changed a lot in last 20-25 years. Internet has played a major role, and the world is going to change even more faster in the coming years thanks to AI, machine learning, and more access to internet. And we strongly believe blockchain and cryptocurrencies are also going to play a huge role in disrupting the world we know. Why is it so, right? You should also see how much a technology is disruptive by the amount of investments that goes into the field, and what are the world leaders in technology, like how they assess this, right? If you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, if you look at Google I/O, you look at Apple conferences, what are the technologies that they talk about, right? That kind of gives us sense of the next coming 5-10 years, right? These are technologies they are interested in. They are going to bring this technologies to the world, and we can surely believe that they have done the research. So if you look at 2019, 2018, we had Zuckerberg taking sudden interest in cryptocurrencies, right? We also see why this is disruptive, and in a way, it is also going to be dangerous for his phone system, right? How cryptocurrencies can actually disrupt centralized systems like Facebook. This is also something we are going to see in this presentation. And within actually a matter of 18 months, he got into a consortium which had all the biggest players in the market, from Vodafone to Visa, Lyft, Stripe, eBay, Spotify, PayU, to create something that is similar to cryptocurrency, but not exactly a cryptocurrency, right? If you look at Jack Dorsey, the Twitter's co-founder, so he is also interested a lot in cryptocurrencies, right? His another venture called Square Crypto, they allow people to purchase cryptocurrencies through their app. Bitcoin is an open source platform, if you know, right? And Jack Dorsey, without expecting any kind of financial remuneration, he is putting some of his engineers to work on Bitcoin, right? That is the kind of commitment he shows to Bitcoin. There are a lot of other people. There is someone called Jack Slayer, who runs MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy is one of the world's biggest analytics firm. So recently, like a few months back, they made a huge investment in cryptocurrencies, like mainly Bitcoin. And they made another stash of investment, like around $400 million this month. So why are so many people taking interest in cryptocurrencies? Why is Bitcoin so important, and how it's going to disrupt the world? See, that is the thing we are going to see. And with respect to any disruptive technology, it goes through this kind of a diffusion curve, right? Uh, it's very difficult to pinpoint at which part we are in. We can either be called innovators or we can be called early adopters, because Bitcoin as a technology, it's just 10 years old, right? you hear a word blockchain very, very often, right? But before Bitcoin came into existence, before 2009, there was nothing called blockchain. Bitcoin is the first cryptocurrency. It's also the first application of blockchain. People saw the power of Bitcoin and they thought, why can't we apply the same principles in other fields and create similar applications? That is how other cryptocurrencies and blockchain got created. So in the first half, we will try to understand what is Bitcoin, why it is important, and why it is disruptive, right? When we take any technology, we can easily define it in terms of how the tech stack works, right? If you take internet, you can say about how the server is there, how a HTTP request goes and the response is received, and how it is served through a browser like Chrome. But that is not how we understand technology, right? As a layman, how someone understands technology is how it is used. If you ask someone going in the road, what is internet? He will not be talking all the technology. He'll talk about how he uses internet. He says, I use it to chat with my friends in WhatsApp. I use it to do video calls, right? We can do sessions like this, webinars through internet. We can check emails, social media, and all those things, right? This is how someone without knowledge of the behind the hood of internet looks at internet. Bitcoin is something similar, I would say, because it's very difficult to fix Bitcoin with one line definition. And especially because Bitcoin was created by someone called Satoshi Nakamoto and he went anonymous after a year, no one knows like what it actually represents and what is the power. It is like you cannot say internet cannot be used for this, internet cannot be used for that, right? Internet is a horizontal technology, just like how electricity was a horizontal technology. Every field it touched, it disrupted, right? Right now we are trying to see what are the potential applications of Bitcoin. This doesn't restrict what Bitcoin can do. We are just talking about what Bitcoin could be and what Bitcoin can do, right? First and foremost, the creator, he envisioned Bitcoin as a replacement for currencies like US dollar, like INR, right? Why does he have to do it? That we'll see in the later slides. But in a lot of ways, Bitcoin is very similar like US dollar. You can make payments through that, right? A lot of organizations like Wikipedia, Expedia, Microsoft, they accept payments in cryptocurrencies. Dell accepts payment in cryptocurrencies, right? On the other hand, Bitcoin is also like a protocol. Like how internet is powered by HTTP and TCP/IP, Bitcoin networks works on the basis of Bitcoin protocol, right? Bitcoin itself is a protocol. So when you are buying a Bitcoin or a 0.5 Bitcoin, you are buying a part of that protocol, right? We cannot directly invest in a HTTP or TCP/IP. We know how that powers internet. It's the backbone of internet. It's the foundation of internet, but we don't have means to invest in it and reap rewards from those protocols, right? But Bitcoin has a mechanism where you can directly invest in the protocol and reap rewards. Also, Bitcoin is like a payment network, like a Visa or a MasterCard. If there is a shop, he wants to accept payments. Before, he used to have a card machine, right? Apart from accepting cash, he used to have a card machine, right? So when you make a payment through your card, there is your issuer bank, there is this receiving bank, and then this card payment industry. They all work together to create a payment network so that the money is transferred from the payer to the merchant. With respect to Bitcoin, it is also like that, right? Bitcoin provides a mechanism. It is just like an email service. So if you want to accept payments, just like how you want to accept a mail, you just show your email address, put it in the visiting card. Similarly, you can put the Bitcoin address in a visiting card, or you can put it in the front of the merchant shop as a QR code, and people can scan and just make the payments. So this is where Bitcoin is wonderful, right? It is not just the US dollar or INR. It is also the payment network, and it is also protocol that governs the network. One place where it differs from the existing currencies is that it's scarce. US dollar, it's printed in unlimited amounts. Indian rupee, it's printed in unlimited amounts. Like every year, billions of rupees, trillions of dollars get printed, right? But Bitcoin, it is scarce, similar to gold. The amount of gold in Earth is limited, right? Gold is not produced in Earth; it's produced in stars and supernovas, right? Whatever got distributed 4.5 billion years ago, that we are harnessing now. That we are mining now. So that is the reason why the concept of creating Bitcoin is called mining, right? So Bitcoin has an upper cap. There can always be only 21 million Bitcoins ever. Like 2.1 crore Bitcoins is the upper cap, right? Not even a single Bitcoin over and above that can be produced. So Bitcoin is the first concept which created the concept of digital scarcity. If you look at digital realm, if you have an MP3 file or have a movie file, you can make 10,000 copies, 15,000 copies, right? 20 years back, we used to have those film-based cameras, right? You could take at most 35, 40 pictures per roll. These days, we don't even think twice before taking a picture, right? Why is it so? Because digital is so cheap. You can take 100 pictures and delete 90 of them, just like that. So in digital world, how do you create an asset that is scarce? That was a problem that was not solved for a long time, and Bitcoin was the first application to solve it in a proper way, right? So Bitcoin is, as I already explained, it's analogous to email. Uh, Decades back, when you are making a communication with someone in the States or in, say, England, you used to write a letter. It goes to your post box, then to the local post office, then to the head post office, then the ship goes to London, and it goes through a similar route and gets communicated, right? But these days, how does communication happen? It matters. In a matter of second, the communication happens, right? It's a peer-to-peer communication. When I send a email to my friend in US, it directly reaches him. It doesn't go through a multiple hop, right? It saves time, it saves energy, and it's very, very efficient. Bitcoin is something like that. When you make a payment in the current financial system, which you will see, it goes through multiple hops, right? When I'm making my payment of, say, 2,000 rupees from my HDFC account to someone like, say, SBI account through NEFT, first I have to reach to my bank, initiate the transfer. The bank gets in touch with the NPCI, National Payments Corporation, and then the National Payments Corporation, they get in touch with the receiving bank, right? And the reconciliation has to happen within these two banks, and then my payment gets credited in the other account, right? We have to go through multiple hops, and every time you have an intermediary, you are adding to the inefficiency. What Bitcoin does is it tries to solve this inefficiency by facilitating direct communication between the sender and the receiver, right? That's why if you go to the Bitcoin white paper, it talks about peer-to-peer transaction. There are two peers and they are directly transacting without a middleman in between. And the next important thing about Bitcoin is it is smart money. Since, see, we also have these kind of smart light bulbs, all those smart devices are coming into our ecosystem, right? What do these do, right? A normal light, only when you switch on, it switches on, right? When it has to be turned off, you have to physically turn off the switch, right? The latest light bulbs you can control, right? Every day 6 o'clock, or you have a motion sensor. When someone comes in visibility, then it switches on, or when there is like a less light, then it switches on, right? Similarly, Bitcoin is also not a dumb money, it's a programmable money. You can create conditions within Bitcoin, like on achievement of certain conditions, make this payment possible. Ensure that next 6 months, this Bitcoin cannot be moved, keep it locked. So these kind of small programs you can create within Bitcoin, right? And make the spending conditional, right? And the last and the most important part, unlike our financial ecosystem, anything in the financial ecosystem, Bitcoin is open source. What does open source mean? Open source means permissionless innovation. Anyone can participate, anyone can add to value to the code, right? And anyone can use it. There is no one organization or one country that takes a lot of advantage over the program, right? If you look at it, whatever you have explained, Bitcoin looks very similar like internet. The characteristics that made Bitcoin the standard of global communication, right? Whatever communication happens today, 99% happens through internet, right? You do WhatsApp, you do Facebook, right? You do emails, or even Telegram, voice over internet calls. Even actually Airtel, Jio, they all use internet based calls, right? They make calls through data. Internet has become the standard of communication, right? Similarly, Bitcoin has the properties to become standard of global currency, right? It is decentralized, just like how internet is not owned by one single country. Bitcoin is not owned by a single organization or a country. It is neutral, doesn't give advantage to one particular country or organization. US dollar, for example, gives huge advantage to US government, right? They force other countries to follow dollar. That is the reason a lot of wars happen in Middle East and things, right? US government can freely print US dollars. That is the reason they are able to give $1,000, $2,000 as stimulus checks to their population, while we are not able to give even 500 rupees to our population when pandemic affected us, right? And next important thing about Bitcoin is it's transparent, right? You can watch how much Bitcoins are transferred from one another to another. And as I already explained, it's open source, right? Anyone can contribute to it. And permissionless innovation. And the last and the most important part about anything in internet today is called network effect. when only two people, only one person has a telephone, or only one user is there in a social media platform, it has no use, right? You're not able to communicate. When there's like second person added to the network, that is when there is like real value. When you have like 100 people, the value increases exponentially. Facebook is so valuable, WhatsApp is so valuable, right? The valuations are through the roof. It is because of the users, right? Every time a new user adds to the platform, the value doesn't increase linearly, it increases exponentially. Similarly, with Bitcoin, as more and more people get onboarded into this ecosystem, the value is rising exponentially, right? Whatever network effect that drove internet and made it so valuable, similar network effects also can play a role in Bitcoin, right? And also when you look at fiat currency, right, it is printed without any remorse, right? Unlimited amounts are being printed by, and in some cases it's printed by corrupt governments, right? Bitcoin tries to provide a immutable and automated sound money as against the existing currency that we have, right? So if you look at open source, right, why is open source important? When you're buying a Windows operating system and a Windows laptop, you realize you are spending 6,000, 8,000 rupees just for the Office and Windows package, right? But you're getting a mobile phone for like 2,000, 3,000 rupees, and that's a smartphone, right? Why is it so? Because it uses an open source and operating system as against a centralized operating system like Windows. Android is open source, it's free for use, right? That is the reason our phones are so much more cheaper, right? Access to information has become so much more easy because of Wikipedia, right? 20 years back, you have to go through databases, paid databases, and all those things to get even basic information. Things like Wikipedia has made it accessible. VLC player, right? How many of us use VLC to watch a movie rather than some Windows media player or inbuilt media players, right? Because VLC is open source, the developments happen much more faster, and it's free for usage. Similarly, we use Chrome browser, right? Over and against any other browser. So bringing open source concept to financial ecosystem can unlock similar kind of value, right? Wherever you see a closed system, right? Internet has become a closed loop, right? You have Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. They control large chunk of projects. If you want to make it open source, to make access democratic, right, to all without any centralized agency, we'll see how open source systems like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can pave the path, right? We'll see it in coming hosting. As I already explained, see, now I'll try to explain why is Bitcoin relevant, right? What is the biggest innovation that Bitcoin has brought in, right? One thing I spoke about is digital scarcity, and second thing is about peer-to-peer transaction, right? Why is it not possible before Bitcoin, and why is it become suddenly possible? We will see here. So normal bank transfer, this is how it works, right? As I explained, you contact your HDFC bank, they talk to the NPCI server, they talk to the receiver SBI bank, and then the payment gets received, right? This is like it goes through a hop, so there's like a time delay. There is like 6 rupees, 10 rupees gets charged for each and every transfer that you make, right? UPI has currently been subsidized, but still some charges are incurred that has not been passed on to the users for now, but at some point UPI transactions will also be charged. How can we avoid all these intermediaries and directly communicate between sender and receiver, just like email, right? That is what Bitcoin is trying to do, right? What is it solving? In real world, if you have a 20 rupee note or like say 100 rupee note, you can spend it in one place. You cannot give the same copy to someone else unless you have a counterfeit, and it is counterfeit, right? You are cheating law and you will be arrested. It's easy to differentiate between a real currency note and a counterfeit currency note. But what happens in digital realm? If I have an MP3 file that I download from internet, I can make 10,000 copies of that file, and every copy will be same bit by bit, right? So in that case, how do I know which is original and which is duplicate, right? This was a problem that was not solved for a long time, right? How do we ensure that double spending doesn't happen? If I have some digital asset, I should be able to spend only once, not multiple times. We used to collect playing cards, right? Playing cards supposed to be unique. That's why it has value. When you can create 10,000 copies, right? We can download playing cards from internet. I can share with all my friends. This thing loses value, right? So how, I have some chat response. Okay. Okay. So it loses value, right? So in digital realm, how do you ensure something is scarce? Okay. So Bitcoin solves this important problem of digital scarcity, right? What they normally do in real world is the sender account destroys the currency in the sender's bank account, and the receiver bank, it creates new money in the receiver's bank account, right? That is the reason we need some people called trusted third parties. Okay, so they are called TPTs. Okay, any transaction we do in internet, there is someone sitting in the middle. When you are booking a room, you have a Make My Trip, or when you are, or a Airbnb in the middle, right? When you book a flight ticket, there's Make My Trip in the middle. When you are purchasing something, let's say a mobile phone, right? There's Amazon sitting in the middle, right? When I send a mail to you, there is Gmail sitting in the middle, right? How do we avoid this kind of people in between and directly do the transaction? Right? We will see. Let's take example, right? Rob is a person who wants to send 0.3 Bitcoin to Laura. Okay. So let's assume you have a Bitcoin wallet. So what you will do, you'll open your wallet, okay, log into it. You will scan Laura's address. Similar to how if I want to send you an email, I need your email address. I need Laura's email address to transfer these coins, right? I will fill the amount, right? I have to send 0.3 BTC. So I'm putting 0.3 BTC and I click send. Okay. My password, whatever has been stored, right? The private key, basically a signature of whatever address I have, I need to use it to sign it, this transaction, to ensure that, okay, I authorize this transaction. Once the transaction is authorized, it goes to some space called mempool, right? From mempool, miner, there are people called miners who take all these transactions, right? They put it into one block. Like one block can contain up to 3,000 transactions. Okay, so they put 3,000 transactions into a block and then they process it, right? They add it to the existing chain of blocks, right? I'll not go much more into detail here, right? If there is a session about how Bitcoin works under the hood, I can talk about this in much detail, right? They form some, whatever the miner do, they have to form something called a Merkle root. Each transaction, they have to find a hash. They have to combine two hashes and find hash for that. Okay, combine two more hashes like this, find hash for that, and ultimately find the root hash. This will look like something like a binary tree, right? This root hash, the hash of the previous block and the nonce along with, put together, they have to find a new hash. And there's a condition that this new hash needs to start with 18 zeros, right? This is basically to make this process slightly difficult. Not everyone should be able to do it. At any point of time, only one person should be solve it. And at any point of time, a block should take around, on average, 10 minutes to solve, right? This is the reason why they have created this kind of a mechanism, right? So this is how a blockchain looks like. There are like n number of blocks, and each block is linked to the previous block, because the block 3 should have the hash of block 2. Block 2 will have the hash of block 1. Block 4 will have the hash of block 3, right? If you make any small changes, I think most of the participants here understand hashing algorithm. Even you add a small digit, you remove a character, the entire hash output changes, right? So if you try to tamper with block 1, since that is the input for block 2's hash, block 2 becomes irrelevant, right? Since block 2 has become irrelevant, block 3 also has irrelevant, right? So that is the reason why Bitcoin and blockchain is called immutable, right? You cannot tamper. Right now, there are around 650,000 blocks that have been created in Bitcoin, right from 2009. You can go in internet and check each and every block, right? What are the transactions that it has? What is the block hash, right? If anyone wants to remove a transaction from a block in 2010 or 2011, what it does is it renders all the blocks invalid, right? Whatever blockchain that guy has created, the data, it becomes invalid. It's not accepted by the community, right? These are steps like how you create an address, how mempool works, how blockchain explorer works, right? We can talk about this later if you have time, right? I will give you a small demonstration, right? Since this session, I wanted to focus on what is so disruptive about Bitcoin. Why is it so such a big competition to the existing fintech ecosystem, right? We'll focus on that, right? So thing is, we have to compare any new technology with the existing technology, where the existing technology fails and where this new technology adds value, right? If you look at the concept about any money, any currency, there are few qualities for a currency. There must be a reason, right? Why gold for 2,000, 3,000 years, it has been like standard of currency. Why people have valued gold throughout the history, right? First thing is gold is very, very durable. You take gold and you dig a hole below your house and bury it. After 10,000 years, if someone finds it, the gold will still be fresh. It will not have rusted. It will not have disappeared. 100 gold coins will remain as 100 gold coins, because gold is a noble metal, doesn't react easily. So that's the reason it's very durable, right? uh, Gold is not so much portable. If you want to make payments, right, for a Boeing airplane, you cannot carry 10 kgs of gold, right? It's very cumbersome. It's easy to carry a checkbook or transfer it digitally rather than gold, right? Next, the concept is called fungibility. Fungibility is 1 gram of gold equivalent to another gram of gold, right? Would this gram of gold be valued slightly more than this gram of gold, right? Gold is exact, right? Identical. 1 gram of gold is very, very identical with another gram of gold. So that is the reason it scores A in fungibility. Is it verifiable? Gold is not so easily verifiable, right? When you need to test the purity of gold, you need to take the touchstone. Even then, you are not sure whether outside alone is gold or inside also it's filled with gold. It's very difficult for a common man to verify the purity of gold, right? Then the divisibility. One of the important things about gold is it can be divided into minute particles, right? That is the reason we use gold for jewelry. Intricate designs can be made because gold is malleable and ductile, right? Next thing is scarcity. As I already explained, gold is scarce. You don't find gold everywhere, right? Gold deposits are only found in certain parts of the world where it can be mined in a commercially possible manner. Established history. Gold has this advantage. Over 3,000 years, 4,000 years, people have valued gold. No other currency in history or no other method has been valued in such a way for such a long time. And the last is censorship resistance. Okay, what do we mean by censorship resistance? You imagine you are living in a country like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where there's a civil war that is happening. Government is coming to your house and saying, I need money to run my military. Okay, give me whatever wealth you have, right? Can you safeguard your wealth, which you have earned through hard-earned effort, right? Gold is to an extent censorship resistant as compared to a currency. Indian government could declare 1,500 rupees note invalid overnight, right? You cannot do that to gold. Gold will still retain some value. People will be able to possess gold, and that cannot be confiscated by government, right? So these are the qualities that we saw about gold. What makes it a superior currency? If you take it for fiat currency, right? Fiat currencies are not that durable as compared to gold. 10,000 rupee note, it gets torn, right? Banks collapse, currencies fail, right? If you look at Venezuela, Zimbabwe, they're not durable. And it also keeps on losing value. Whatever 100 rupee could buy 30 years ago, it is not able to buy the similar amount today, right? It keeps on reduces value. Is it portable? To an extent, yes. And to an extent, no. If you want to send some money to someone in, say, Nigeria or Kenya, it's not so easy to send money, right? It goes through multiple hubs, the charges are expensive. It is not that portable. And physical cash is even more less portable, right? If you want to pay someone 500 crores, you cannot do it in physical cash, right? Is it verifiable? To an extent, but you still see a lot of counterfeit notes in circulation. It is not so easy for a layman to verify and differentiate between a real and counterfeit note. Is it divisible? To an extent, up to 1 rupee, 2 rupees, you can differentiate. Okay, 25 paise, 10 paise, it used to be valuable. Right now, you cannot use that, right? It's invalid. So you only up to certain limit, fiat currency can be divisible, right? We will see why it's so important in future slides. Is it scarce? Fiat currency is one of the least scarce kind of monetary thing. Government prints money like crazy, right? That's why it scores F. If you look at the entire chart, there's only one place where they have given a fail rating. That is where fiat currency is not scarce, right? Why is it so? If you imagine, you will have your dad, your parents, or someone above 50, 60, they talk about how they could eat a full meals with 1 rupee, right? At some point in time, 1 rupee was so valuable. The land used to cost so cheap. But what has suddenly happened? Why are the rates increasing so much? It's not that the characteristics of full meals have changed. We are eating the same thing that we were eating 30, 40 years ago in a restaurant. What has changed is the buying power of 1 rupee. Because there is so much more money in the circulation, because government has printed so much more money, the existing money keeps on losing value. That is why it's called panavikam in Tamil. It's called inflation in English. When you say 4%, 5% is inflation, if you have 10,000 rupees and you bury it and take it out after 10 years, it will be losing 5% of its value, what it can purchase year on year, right? We take this for granted, but it should not be so, right? Government puts 3 kind of taxes on us. One is the direct income tax. Second is the indirect tax like GST. This is the third tax, inflation. This is like the least talked about tax, and this is the most harmful tax. Without realizing, you are losing money if you are holding cash. Hey, that is the reason we invest in fixed deposit. That's the reason we put in banks. And inflation rate is higher than the bank interest rate. Like if bank is giving you 3 or 2% interest and inflation is taking 5 or 10%, then you are losing money, even if you are putting your money in bank. Right? And is it censorship resistant? No. As I already explained, demonetization, government could just make money invalid, or they'll say you have to deposit all those currencies in bank, right? Otherwise you lose value. I'll give only 10% of that. Now we come to the most important point, where Bitcoin is better and where Bitcoin is worse. Is it durable? It is more durable than fiat currencies, like, but caveat, as long as you remember the password, right? Or as long as you trust the people who are the custodians, right? Bitcoin is like a locker. You can store your currency, but if you lose the key, you lose the key. No one, not even anyone across the world, not even the founder of that currency, can gain access to the lost wallet, right? So it is not as durable as gold, right? But it slightly scores better than fiat currency in terms of durability. If you have like 10 rupees in Bitcoin, right? Even after 100 years, you will still have the 0.0001. Maybe that will be valued much more. But if you have one Bitcoin now, even after 20 years, one Bitcoin will still remain in the address as long as you don't spend it. So in that way, it's durable. Is it portable? Yes. As I said, it's like email. As long as I have someone's address, I can immediately send even 0.00001 Bitcoin. Bitcoin can be divided into 8 digits. So it's also divisible to a large extent as compared to fiat currencies. And I can send it instantly. And it's fungible. Okay. One Bitcoin is almost equal to one Bitcoin, but you can, since you can trace the transaction, who you received this one Bitcoin from, who that person received one Bitcoin from, it's slightly not fungible. Gold, you cannot say who you received this gold from, right? It's difficult to establish provenance. But in and fiat, it's also difficult in cash, but in digital, you can track, you have a paper trail. Similarly, Bitcoin, it is not that fungible as compared to gold. Is it verifiable? Yes, it is impossible to create a fake Bitcoin. It's an open challenge, right? Bitcoin is currently worth around $100 billion, the market cap. If someone is able to create Bitcoin, counterfeit Bitcoins, he can earn 15 lakh rupees. Sorry, it's 17 lakh rupees around right now. It was 15 lakhs yesterday. Today it's 17 lakhs, right? To create a counterfeit currency, if you are able to find a hack, you are going to be a billionaire in no time, right? But it cannot be created. That is the reason the value stands. And that's the reason I'm saying it's verifiable. As I said, it can be divided into 8 digits. It's divisible. It is scarce. As I said, the upper cap is 21 million. See, gold is not that scarce because people will find a new method to mine gold from seawater. You'll suddenly see the supply of gold increases. There are talks about asteroids being mined for valuable elements like gold, right? So there is not, the upper cap is not limited, right? It's only limited by availability in nature, and as our horizons expand, as we conquer more planets, and as we conquer the seas, we will see supply of gold increase. But Bitcoin, it's governed by maths. You cannot go beyond 21 million, right? Established history, Bitcoin is the least recent. Like Bitcoin is old only 10 years. Fiat currency is old like 50 years, right? Before that, we had gold-backed fiat currency. Now we have a normal fiat currency. And Bitcoin is the most censorship resistant. As long as you hold your password in your mind, there's no person in the world who can get access to your wallet. You can say, I forgot my password. What are you going to do about it? Right? This is the money supply I talked about. This is for something I made in March. Right? This slide I had taken. You can see how from 2008 onwards, US government has been printing dollars like crazy. Right? From somewhere around 1.5 trillion, we had like around 4 trillion US dollars by March 2020. Then what happened? Then the pandemic came. To ensure that the pandemic effects are not very bad, government created a lot of money supply and distributed it to its people. So suddenly, if you look at March 2020, whatever happened before looked like child's play, right? There's a sudden increase, and suddenly we have over $6 trillion worth of money in the supply, right? And what happens if government keeps on printing money? This is what happens. This happens in Zimbabwe, right? In Zimbabwe, people carry money like this because government, whenever they need something to make payments for the employees or for any physical infrastructure projects, they just printed more money. At some point of time, they were even printing $100 trillion note. This is like a very famous collectible. People They don't buy it because it's valuable. They buy it because it's like a museum piece. This is what happens when government prints money in an unlimited format. US government is able to escape because they are able to export the inflation. Governments like India, China, we take these currencies and hold as foreign reserves. So the excess is removed from the market in US from time to time. When this gets saturated, we can face something similar to what happened in Zimbabwe, right? So far I spoke about Bitcoin, right? I tried to explain how Bitcoin can eliminate or can compete with the existing fintech systems. As I said, Visa or Mastercard, they charge 2% for every transaction I make. So if I pay 100 rupees, only 98 rupees reaches the merchant. 2 rupees goes to the Visa or Mastercard, whichever card I use, right? If you look at it, they don't actually physically move money. It's just transfer of data. They have to just communicate between the receiving bank and the issuing bank, just like how a UPI transfer happens. But why do they charge 2%? And how do we get away with that? It is because there are like only a handful of companies. If you look at card payment, there is like Visa, Mastercard, Maestro, and you have Diners Club, right? Recently, Indian government and Chinese government, they saw that this is like such a bad exploitation, and they started their own payment network. So we have RuPay and Union Pay, right? But it's still ripe for disruption because they're they are charging enormous amount of money. Look at email. Email does the same job. It moves data from one point to another, and email is free, right? Why can't we do it same for the financial ecosystem? That's what Bitcoin is trying to do. It's trying to disrupt banks. It's trying to disrupt government currencies like US dollar, rupee. It is also disrupting payment networks, right? Like the Visa and Mastercard, right? The next important thing we can see, we so far we have spoken about Bitcoin. Let's also talk about other cryptocurrencies, how they are useful and how they are creating an impact, right? First thing I'll talk about is Ethereum, right? In 2015, the guy who created Ethereum, his name is Vitalik Buterin. He saw that, okay, Bitcoin has done a phenomenal job. It has been able to eliminate middlemen. It has been able to disrupt financial ecosystem. It has been able to create a currency that is decentralized. Why can't I provide the same infrastructure for other software applications? Why can't I create a decentralized Play Store? Okay, from his idea was born Ethereum. Okay, Ethereum is like a Google Play Store where anyone can host apps. But unlike Google, which charges 30% on all transactions, Ethereum doesn't charge anything. You have to just make payment for the computing power that you use, just like AWS, right? You only pay for what you use. You are running 10 lines of code. Whatever computing power you are consuming, for that you will pay a nominal amount, right? So what this has created is, this has created a huge potential. Anyone can create an app, and similarly how app ecosystem has taken away our lives, right? They have like influenced our lives like anything. Whatever we do, we use an app. For Zoom, listening to the webinar, we use a Zoom app, right? For accessing to Facebook, we use a Facebook app. But these are all controlled by centralized parties. Why can't we decentralize this and put the entire concept on the internet, blockchain, right? That's what Ethereum is trying to do. But as with any early stage system, there are bandwidth issues. Ethereum can handle only certain amount of transactions, like say 12 transactions per second. So there are alternative technologies like Tron, EOS. These are cryptocurrencies. They are trying to create a platform with even higher bandwidth. This is like the race that is happening. In 2005, 2007, we had Facebook, we had Orkut, we had MySpace, Hi-Fi. Everyone is trying to provide a social media platform. And right now we know Facebook kind of won, right? We also have Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. So similarly, we have multiple coins, cryptocurrencies trying to create a valid platform. How this is important, we'll see. Okay, I'll talk about this. Okay, there's this cryptocurrency called Origin. What it's trying to do is, anything that we see in sharing economy, Uber is a competitor of Lyft, right? Instead of Lyft, you can see is Uber. If we can replace middlemen, just like how Bitcoin did with banks, how much value you can generate, right? Take an example of Uber or Lyft. What do? They match a rider with the driver, right? It's a very simple concept, right? When a rider is booking a cab, you have to find all the closest cabs available in that area and assign the one closest to him
to this rider, right? It's a simple algorithm, but Uber charges 30% cut on every transaction. If you are paying 500 rupees for a cab drive, 150 rupees goes to Uber, only 350 reaches the driver, right? What we can disrupt, make this open source, this concept, and distribute 150 rupees back to the driver, or maybe you get subsidized. You pay only 400 rupees, driver gets 400 rupees, you save 100 rupees, and the driver makes extra 50 rupees. Maybe you have to pay like 2 or 5 rupees for the Ethereum blockchain to make this transaction happen. So Origin is trying to do this, not just for Uber, for any sharing economy, like Airbnb. Why should I use Airbnb to list my house? I'll list directly on the Origin platform, which is not going to charge me anything. You think about booking flight tickets, you think about booking hotels in Make My Trip. Everywhere there is this potential of disintermediation. You can remove the middleman and directly access it. The best example that we can give is like casino. Whenever you play something like a blackjack, or when you play a dice game, the house, they take 2 or 5% cut. That's how they make their money, right? When you make a betting platform, right? Like now we have Dream11. Every time someone makes a bet, Dream11 makes a cut. Correct. Why can't we create this concept open source and launch it? There's something called Augur, AUGUR, which is trying to create a betting economy. People will be able to bet on certain events and make money out of it. Right? For that, you don't need to give house any commission. Right? You remove the broker in between. Directly, two people can bet, and based on the outcome, the winner will get benefited. Right? When I talk about this, there are also other things that are required. When you are making a bet about, let's say, cricket match, there needs to be information: who scored how many runs, okay, who took how many wickets, and all those things. There needs to be someone, a reliable provider of information, right? Because blockchain by itself, it is not conscious, right? So it needs information somewhere outside. So there is a coin called Chainlink, which is trying to create this kind of oracles, which will provide data. They have roped in feeds like Reuters, right, which gives news. They also want them to give sports syndicate and use that for making those decisions, right? So these kind of Origin and all those apps, they are hosted on Ethereum platform, right? Then there is an interesting concept called basic attention token. You just look at ad net economy, right? Google, despite all its plethora of applications, it makes 80 to 90% of its revenue only from ad network. Facebook, ad is the primary source of revenue, right? As a user, we don't get to make anything, right? And we are pestered with so many ads that are not even relevant to us, ads that track us, which we don't want. We want some kind of privacy. How do we bypass this? Okay, so these people who created a basic attention token, they created a browser called Brave browser. Okay, so there you can opt out of internet. It's like an Chrome with a built-in ad blocker. And again, it's not for all, right? If you want to watch ads and get paid for it, you can also opt in, right? See, anyways, I'm seeing ads every day. Okay, why don't I get paid for it? If you choose that option, what happens is the advertiser, rather than giving the money to Google or Facebook, they provide it directly to the guy who is watching those advertisements. I get paid in bad coins. Okay, the advertiser, for example, Geotes as a cryptocurrency exchange, I want to reach to my users. I will purchase 10,000 bad coins, and I'll say whoever watches this ad and clicks this ad, I'm going to pay 5 BAT coins. By removing the intermediary, we are unlocking the value that Facebook or Google, like Google is almost $1 trillion company, right? $800 million worth of value is there. That can be distributed back to the people. When we say large corporations like Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're getting stronger and stronger each day. There are antitrust lawsuits. They're having control over so much data. Right? This need not be the case. This data can be given back to the users. Right? Why is it so? Why is these things possible in the cryptocurrency economy? Right? For that, we have to understand this concept called FAT protocols. HTTP, TCP, IP, when they created, they were thin protocols. Right? End of the day, they are the foundation of internet. But we see that the guys who created it, they are like not even millionaires, right? Their net worth is like what, 10 or $50 million. Guys who created small applications like Google, Facebook, Amazon, over and above this layer, they are making billions and billions of dollars money, right? Why is it so? When they designed HTTP and TCP/IP, the data was not within the protocol. The data is with the applications that are above it. Google controls our data. Facebook controls our data. Ethereum, when they created, Bitcoin, when they created, they ensured that the data stays in the protocol itself. Okay, the applications are called thin protocols, and the thin applications, and the protocol is called fat protocol. You can Google and study more about this, but this is what is making possible disintermediation and removing the centralized organizations, right? So we saw about Brave institution model. So okay, there's another concept called recently in the last 6 months. This concept is under rage, right? It's called DeFi, decentralized finance. So whatever things we are able to do in finance, lending, borrowing, right, collateral, mortgage, all those things. Why can't we create a fixed deposits? Why can't we create similar economy for cryptocurrencies? That is the basis of creation of these DeFi's. If you look at the global economy, in US, interest rates are negative. Okay, in Germany, the interest rate is negative. Japan, the interest rate is close to negative. Right? In India, the interest rates are, when you are borrowing at 10%, 12%. Right? That is enormous. Why can't we connect these two areas? Right? That is what this DeFi tries. By creating one common banking platform, one common decentralized platform, people in US, they'll be able to earn 3%, 5% on their deposits. And people in India will be able to get loans at 4% and 5%. Right? So these kind of decentralized economies, decentralized finances, they can reduce the differentiation between developed and developing countries. Developing countries and underdeveloped countries is where capital is required in high amounts, and the interest rates are also very high, which is suffocating innovation. Right? By creating a common platform, we are able to replicate centralized finance in a much better manner. Okay. And another important thing, if you look at current internet ecosystem, when you are making a card payment, you cannot make payments less than 2 or 3 rupees, right? Just look at why is it so? Because we have tried to take the offline infrastructure. Okay, in real world, I cannot pay below 1 or 2 rupees. Okay, there's nothing available below 1 or 2 rupees. So that has become like the bare minimum, right? And there are costs associated with each transaction. So they have ensured that there is this minimum. We have this limit. For example, when I'm watching a movie in Netflix, if I don't like the full movie, I don't have to pay for full movie. So forget subscription based. Let's take this example of Audible. Okay, let's take an example of audiobook. I listen for the whole book. I can pay the payment for the whole book. Let's say it's $1, right? But if I'm only reading 2 pages, 3 pages, listening to only 5 pages, if there is a mechanism where I can only pay for whatever I used, right? If micro payments are possible, I pay 1 cent or like half a cent for each page I read, or even each word I read, right? If it's a good book, I'll be making full payment. The author is benefited. If it is like a pathetic book, I don't have to make payment for the whole book, right? This can be used in art. This can be used in music. This can be used in media, right? Even in newspapers, right? People ask for 1 month subscription, 1 year subscription. Why can't I only pay for the articles that I need? Like micro payments, I'll pay half a rupee per article that I read, right? And as I said, if I watch an ad, Facebook makes so much money because they don't get paid with single ads. They take a bulk purchase. But if as a user, if I'm getting paid for ads, I'll be getting paisas for an ad. I'll not even be getting in rupees, right? The current digital infrastructure, it doesn't have the potential to support micropayments. Cryptocurrencies like Ripple, Stellar, they can support micropayments, right? Micropayments will, like how UPI has made our lives so easy. Micropayments can make our life so much more easier. You will just top up your browser. You can put 10 rupees in your browser, right? And then you can read as many articles, watch as many videos as you want in that day, right? And each of those publishers, they'll be making small amount of money. So this is just whatever I have spoken so far, this is just scratching on the surface. Then there's something called IOTA, right? IOTA, what it's trying to do is it's trying to make Internet of Devices communicate with each other monetarily. For example, in 10 years from now, we have a driverless car that is going. You are saying, okay, I have like extremely urgent meeting with someone very, very important, and I need the right of way, right? You can pay traffic signal to ensure that you get faster access compared to other person. Okay, the traffic signal can pay other people who are willing to wait, right? So these kind of transactions can happen. You can pay to some cars for giving information about traffic. When you open a Google map, okay, you can see congestion in certain roads. What is the traffic conditions? It is because each of those cars are sharing those data to the Google. When you open a Google map, you're automatically sharing what is the speed your car is traveling at. If it's traveling less than 10 kilometers per hour, it automatically marks as this route is congested. Right? What if other cars can pay you for providing this kind of information? Right? When machines have to talk, machines will talk million times a day. Right? Micro payments need to be made. It cannot bog down the database. So for that, they are trying to create this concept called IOTA, right? See, all those things are experimental projects. Some of them will succeed, some of them will fail. I'm not saying this particular project will succeed. You have to invest in it. What I'm saying is concept, right? In 2000s, we had this concept of social media. In 1990s, we had this concept of search engine, right? Before that, in 1980s, we had this concept of operating system. It's very difficult to predict who will win, right? We thought for a long time Internet Explorer is going to be the winner, right? Because that was had the maximum market share in the 2000s. But then Mozilla came, then later Opera came, then we had Chrome, right? This is like a changing landscape. But as a whole, browsers kind of redefined how we use internet. Social media kind of redefined how we access, meet with people, right? So these are all projects which may or may not succeed. But what I believe is the concept that they are trying to solve, the problems they are trying to solve, they will be solved by this currency or some other currency in future. Right? This is the kind of last slide that I have, where I want to talk about this part, horizontal information. I already gave you a glimpse of this. When electricity came, right, it was invented or it was discovered, every industry touched, there had like huge, enormous productivity improvements, right? Manufacturing became crazy with the advent of electricity. Similarly, in the last 20 years, internet has brought efficiency and productivity to a lot of industries. Just imagine this pandemic, we are still able to be productive. Classes are still happening. People are still working from their homes. It is only because of this thing called internet, right? So horizontal innovation is about not changing only one industry, right? The benefits are spread across industries. And how I see blockchain and cryptocurrencies is these are not just touching one industry. Every industry is ripe for disruption, especially whatever industry has already been touched by internet. This is I see as a next wave or next evolution of internet. And also we keep talking about economy, right? And what is the fundamental of economy? Currency is the fundamental of economy. Fintech is fundamental of any economy, right? If we can disrupt this, the kind of value that can be unlocked, the kind of things that will be made possible, the kind of innovation that can happen by disrupting in this layer of the economy, the foundation of the economy, that is enormous, enormous, right? That is the reason why I'm trying to do a lot of sessions like this, spread the word, because there's so much potential. We should start focusing on these sectors. India, especially with the kind of wealth that we have in terms of software engineers, we should start putting more focus in these areas because there's a lot of things to be made. Silicon Valley has a huge advantage today. All the major internet companies, even companies like Salesforce, SaaS companies, they're all based out of Silicon Valley, right? They had the early advantage because internet was created in US in 1969. So they had this early advantage. Someone wants to talk? So similarly, we right now Bitcoin is a nascent technology, just 10 years old. By properly using this, by taking a head start in this, India can become the next Silicon Valley for the next wave of internet, right? So last 5 years, we have a lot of debates about companies becoming more and more centralized, data being abused by companies like Facebook for politics and all those things. Cryptocurrencies have a way to reverse that and give the power back to the users, right? Other things we have already seen. And this is like internet of 1990s, right? In terms of bandwidth, Bitcoin can only process 7 transactions per second, right? Ethereum, as you said, 12 transactions per second. This cannot power internet as we know right now, right? This Google Pay alone, they'll be processing 10,000 transactions per second in India, right? But what it promises is like internet in 1995, we had a 28 kbps, 56 kbps modem, right? You cannot imagine we'll be doing video calls like this. We'll be watching Netflix in that kind of internet connection. But bandwidth challenges will always get solved eventually. It's just an engineering challenge. It's a concept that is important, right? So what I see is there are a lot of scalability solutions that are being right now developed as we talk about. In the matter of 5 years, 10 years, this scalability is not going to be a problem, right? At that point, we'll see a lot more increased adoption, mass adoption, and centralized technologies will have a credible competition from cryptocurrencies and blockchain, right? So far, whatever I have spoken about is only about public blockchains, the cryptocurrencies, right? There is other aspect to blockchain, which is called private blockchain. As I said, blockchain, the core fundamental thing is it's immutable. Once you put data, whatever happened in 2009, 2010 stays for next 100,000 years, right? It stays forever. And you can also trace if Rob is making payment to Laura 0.3 BTC, where did Rob receive this 0.3 BTC from? Okay, where did that person receive 0.3 BTC from? You can find the chain and go to the origin. This is like WhatsApp forward, right? Who made this WhatsApp forward originally? Okay, I got it from this person. He received it from this person. He received it from this person. Okay, this is the guy who actually created this content. To create a chain of command, right? These things is not possible right now in WhatsApp because of encryption, but in blockchains, these are definitely possible because of these kind of functionalities, and because audit happens in every single transaction, right? When Rob makes his 0.3 BTC transaction, it's verified then and there whether Rob has 0.3 BTC and how he received 0.3 BTC. Okay, the reconciliation happens then and there. Not like if you look at fintech, other ecosystems, we do a separate audit process once in 6 months, once in 1 year, right? The auditability is built within the system, which makes adopting blockchain much more efficient, right? Much more transparent and incorruptible, immutable. If you look at land records, right? Some college or some institution, some industry gets built on encroached land, right? They go and destroy the land records in the past because it's mutable. They are all in physical form, or even they are not, even if they are in digital form, they are not tamper proof. People are able to get away with these kind of activities. The second more thing with land record is proving the origin, right? Like 50 or 60% of the pending court cases are civil disputes. Who is owner of this particular land, right? In Bitcoin, if you look at it, you have to establish ownership, and the ownership is established every single transaction. So it is impossible to do a double spending. Whatever is happening with land is double spending. I sell this land to one person, I also sell the land to another person. This particular land is owned by multiple people. That is what is creating disputes, right? If you create blockchain kind of architecture, you can eliminate these kind of problems. Just imagine, judiciary will be much more efficient if we can eliminate these kind of things, right? Provenance. Provenance is when you want to establish the origin. Take the example of diamonds. I'm not sure if people are aware, there's the concept of conflict diamonds. Places like Sierra Leone, where there's a civil war happening. If you watch this movie Blood Diamond, right, you will understand. So what they do is they use children, they use prisoners to mine diamonds. So these diamonds are banned in the international markets. Though it's still diamond, it has the same value. Governments have been forced not to purchase these diamonds. But what happens is these diamonds are mixed with real other diamonds in different places. These diamonds will be transported to Dubai or Amsterdam, and then they are sold to Indians and US people, right? How do we ensure that blood diamonds don't mix with normal diamonds? Conflict diamonds don't mix with normal diamonds. Every diamond has a unique X-ray, right? If you take an X-ray, every diamond will have a different X-ray, the internal structure. If you can take this and wherever it's been mined, if you put it in the blockchain, right, you can always verify, right? I received a diamond. It says it's manufactured in, it was mined in, let's say, South Africa. I can find an X-ray of this, match with the X-ray that is found in the immutable blockchain registry, and I can verify the provenance. Educational institutes, there's a lot of concept of this fake degree certificates, right? A lot of people create, for example, KCG. I can create my own certificate where I print KCG name. It is even difficult for KCG or Anna University to verify which is original, which is duplicate. And they may be able to verify it, but how do companies like Infosys verify it? What Anna University can do is they can create a blockchain system where every certificate they sign it digitally and upload it, and they provide the hash, right? Only those certificates that are signed by anonymity are valid. So Infosys, when Arjun Vijay goes and applies in Infosys and I provide my registration number or hash, they will be able to cross check directly with anonymity. They don't have to go with the separate third party providers, right? So these kind of applications are already being tried with respect to private blockchains. Where they differentiate between public blockchain is, in public blockchain anyone can participate, everyone can participate. You want to be a miner, you want to be a receiver, you want to be a sender, you can do that. In private blockchain, the access is restricted. Who can create data, who can access data, who can read data, it will be restricted. Okay, that is the key differentiated between private and public blockchains. Okay, that is all from my side. Okay, I'll be happy to take questions.